Hey, so this is Ramon, Channel Alpha 4, and this is my Bible study. And this is Genesis chapter 28. Esau marries and Jacob had a dream. All right, so the recap. Isaac blesses Jacob again. Jacob departs for Padan-aram. Esau takes another wife. Jacob has a dream. And then Jacob makes a vow. Pretty simple, right? Okay, so this is the notes. All right, so first off, this chapter starts off with a really ugly episode and a really ugly fact that I've questioned multiple times why it's even in there. I mean, on one hand, it humanizes the characters and shows them the flaws and shows them that they have the same issues that humans have. On the other hand, there are people who would take even a reference like this as sort of permission for them to behave in this manner. But these are narratives, they're not prescriptive. So what am I talking about? Well, there's a distaste for the Hittites and the Canaanites and against foreign marriage just in general. And this is the first biblical reference to what we nowadays would call prejudice and racism. And it will continue throughout. You will see other verses like this in later chapters. But I think this is an acknowledgement of human fault and human folly. Yet on the same note, this situation, this racism is actually the starting point for a new adventure. So basically, Isaac sends Jacob away to find a wife on the wishes of Rebekah. And to do this, Isaac blesses Jacob again. And this blessing is to be fruitful. And this is a continuation of the blessing that Adam received. And then you will also see that Jacob will ask or will give a type of hope, a hopeful blessing, I guess I would say, where he's like, I hope that you will also receive the blessing that was given to Abraham to inherit the land. And I think that's interesting because the previous chapter had the promise already given to him, and now we've taken a step back to where he hopes the promise is conveyed to him. Clearly, the story backtracks here. And this is the second version of the previous story, or this could simply expound on what the previous story only highlighted. So you can look at it both ways. Then you get to a religious phrase, which is the land of your sojourning. Sojourning? Okay. I'm Hispanic and I live in Texas, so this word is going to kick my butt. Sojouning. Hold on, hold on. Let me show you guys. Because I write these notes out beforehand. Let's see, right there. Where's the word? There it is. You got it? Do you see it? Can you read it? Okay, everybody, say it with me now. Sojourning. I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that. Basically, I write, as I'm reading, I write down notes, and then I go back and I read the commentaries, and right now I'm reading 5 different Bible commentaries. Whatever interests me, I kind of like write down those notes on top of my other notes, and then I compile them and I clean it up, and then I give it to you guys. I wasn't doing that originally, and it sounded rambly, so to fix that, I now have typed out notes. So sojourning is a metaphor for the present world. So whatever your current life is, that is you sojourning through the wilderness, okay? It's your journey through the wilderness is basically what it is. You'll see this metaphor again later in Exodus, but it'll be less spelled out because it'll be more literal. Here, you can see the metaphor in it about how it relates to your own journey through the wilderness. Here, Jacob makes this travel to Padan-aram, where he will experience a temporary exile for his sins, and yet the promise will still stand. And if you don't get it, that's a metaphor for the exile that happens in Exodus. And that's also a metaphor for the exile that happens during the exile when the Hebrews are in Babylon. And you could even see that as foreshadowing for the diaspora that the Jews would go through after the Romans conquer Jerusalem. They get kicked out of their land a lot. It is also interesting to note that Jacob split from Esau parallels Abraham's split from Lot. and that Esau's choice to marry a Hittite is an act of resentment against his father. And now, in my own personal opinion, it's against both his father and his mother, but the Bible highlights that it's an act against his father. I think this might be a priestly justification for the treatment of Esau or whatever in the tumult, where he is painted as a much more villainous character. He goes ahead and marries someone that his parents disapprove of to simply get back at them, which, if that is not human, I don't know what is. You know this story. This story has happened. You know this one. Someone dating someone that the parents don't approve of, or marrying someone the parents don't approve of, just to prove a point, just out of spite. Yeah, that never works out. One night on his journey, Jacob has to sleep outside, and he chooses to sleep on a rock and take the rock as a pillow. Okay, so why is that important? Well, the thing is that he has no idea that the place that he has entered into is sacred ground. And the stone, which in Hebrew is called Masibah, this stone is seen as the cornerstone or the foundation stone. Now, that is super important for a lot of religions. But at least in Christianity and Judaism, it most definitely is an important stone. In Christianity, this stone represents Jesus, although sometimes it represents Peter. And the oil that he pours out over the stone represents the Holy Spirit. Remember, that's Christianity's and Catholicism's view of this story. Obviously, the Hebrews who were writing this didn't have that in mind. Okay, just to be clear and fair. So while he's asleep in this dream, Jacob sees a sulam, which can be translated into highway, stairway, ramp, or ladder. The Hebrews here see a reference to the Tower of Babel, which is a ziggurat. And then Catholics here see a hidden reference to the Virgin Mary. And in the Greek Orthodox, that is called the platiera. I don't know, I don't speak Greek. Okay, and then some Protestants, on the other hand, see a mission for angels as messengers to be the deliverers of God's message to humans, mortals. The sulam was a structure much like you see on ancient Mesopotamian temple towers. So these temples were meant to allow divine communication, i.e. communion. Okay, so communion here is not the eating of the wafer, but actually communing with the gods, or here with the one God. So what he would have seen would be a vision like the kind of like straight up ramp, and up at the very top would be a temple where you could talk to God, which is what we would understand as heaven. And the temple thing here is super important, but I will get to that in a second. This verse may be the work of a later editor who either joined or disjointed the narrative of God's arrival by way of the stairway to heaven. So basically a writer came in, an editor came in, or a redactor or whatever, and fixed the story. He saw that there was no explanation for how God got there, so he either moved something apart or moved it together. But through the source evidence and through studying of different ancient texts, you can see that something was adjusted here. We just don't know what. And also in the narrative itself, you kind of see God just kind of show up. So like it kind of hints at that there was a reason for that, and that reason was the dream, that somehow through dreams, through visions, Jacob could see beyond the veil of mortality, into the sacred, into the world of the divine, even if it's just an image, here being a dream. Then God confirms the promise. Thus Jacob is blessed for the third time, just as Esau lost his blessing 3 times. So there's 3 becomes a very important number. Which you'll see that again in Christianity, obviously. And then when Jacob wakes up, he calls the place an abode, or home of God, or the house of El. And this is a reference to either the temple, if you are Jewish, or to the church, if you are Christian. Protestants here think that this church is invisible, while Catholics think this church is a physical body. And as a physical body, it's not just a metaphor for Christ, but it's the organization, the tradition, and the body militant of the congregants. There's an important note here, and if you look up what churches are supposed to look like, specifically parishes, they're supposed to be kind of a map of heaven. And it's supposed to follow the ancient temple design. So that way, when you get to heaven, you'll know where to go. It's like a map that's imprinted into your mind. So when you die, you know where everything is, right? So you're not lost. I know that seems a little weird, but you got to understand that this is the way that people thought. So the layout of the temple for Jerusalem is the layout of heaven. So it's supposed to mirror or reflect heaven on earth. Okay, continuing on. To commemorate this event, Jacob consecrates the place as a sanctuary. Now, this sanctuary was a real and legit temple, and it existed until it was condemned by later priests. And this is after the kingdom split. So you can read about that event at 1 Kings chapters 12 and 13. You'll see that the kingdom has split and that I believe it's the southern kingdom starts condemning the northern kingdom, because the northern kingdom has set up multiple temples and has put mountain shrines and stuff like that. There's a lot of traditions here in Genesis that will be condemned by later priests in Jerusalem, and a lot of people think it was a political fight for power. So when Judaism was decentralized all around Israel and the Levant, there was no central hub within certain limitations. They could worship in their own traditions depending on their group. And even if there were like small little changes that nobody would notice, the priest within Jerusalem, inside the temple, would view that as a kind of like their teething is being taken away from them, but B, that their control and their power is being taken away from them. So other ideas of how to fulfill the scriptures would contradict theirs, and that little conflict, that little stress, would have been very real. So you can read about that in Kings, in 1 Kings. Then Jacob renames the place Bethel. Originally, the name of the town around Bethel was called Luz. And Bethel was important to ancient Israelite worship practices. And Luz was an important site to the pre-Israelic religions of the Levant. That is hard to say. Then we get to the very last line of this chapter, which is teething is established for the second time. Teething here is a counterpoint to Abraham's teething at Salem, back at Genesis chapter 14, verse 20. He set up teething there, and so now the priests want to come in and change that story a little bit and make it from the layman story to a more priestly story, and to give a reasoning for teething that's more spiritual based. So let's get to the questions. Why is finding a suitable spouse so prized? In ancient times, finding a suitable spouse was important just like it is today, but why was that so prized? Well, from my point of view, who you marry is going to reflect in the behavior of your children, and also their genes, which I don't know if they would know this back then, but we know it now, that lineage would also affect the health of the child and future generations. So you're setting up morals, health, you're setting up so much based on who you choose to have children with. The next question that I put down was, what's your criteria for choosing a mate? So you tell me, what's your criteria for choosing a mate? The next question is, why does Jacob still get the full blessing even after his scheming and unworthiness? What is the lesson here? And the lesson, I actually asked this to someone else, and I'll give their answer in a second. But the answer from me is that it doesn't matter how you mess up, you're still God's child. And as children of God, God still loves you. And so no matter how bad you mess up, God will always love you and will always look out for you. That's my answer. But I heard a better answer today, which was that it's like how a father sees a son. So a father will forgive a son almost anything and will still love and look out for their child, no matter how that child messes up. And they'll continually try to correct that child and guide the child, no matter how far they fall or how many mistakes they make. So a father's love is eternal. So I thought that was interesting to see that different point of view. And then what does the teething represent? To me, it represents sacrifice. What does teething represent to you? And then why teeth are sacrifice anything? What's the point on that? I would say watch any of Jordan Peterson's videos on the Bible, and he has a whole lot about sacrifice. I probably am not going to give a better answer than that, but my personal answer is because it shows gratitude. And I know that you can say that, oh, it's saving for the future, or it's showing that you're planning for the future. But from my point of view, it's a way to show gratitude, and I think that's important, especially if you teeth to a church. That's your sanctuary. That's the place you go to connect with God, and a place to go to take refuge from the world, and you should show thanks for that. If you're going to use those services, you should help those services be available, especially when they give food to the poor and all that kind of stuff. It'd be good to help with that. So there's multiple ways to look at teething. Okay, and then what did this story teach its original intended audience? And when I wrote that question down, I felt all smart. So what did the original audience get out of this? What did the original audience that heard it, and what did the original audience that the author thought was going to be receiving it, what did he think that was going to teach them? So what did the author think this chapter was going to teach, and what did the original audience get out of it? I think it's very clear that there's two authors at work in this chapter, possibly three. There's possibly an editor also that came in afterwards, so there's possibly three hands at work here. But if you're going to take it from an inspirational point of view, that God inspired these two writers these two scribes and this one editor to do whatever they did, and then also however the story was transmitted the first time, whatever inspiration came through there, what was the point of the story? And I think, for me, I think that it has to do with the end. I think the end of this chapter is the strong point, is the moral core of this chapter, which is that Jacob sets up teething to the Lord, and he walks into a place that he doesn't know is sacred. But as soon as he realizes it's sacred, he changes his behavior. And I think that's the core message here. So let me get to the extras, because the extras will explain my point of view a little bit better. The lesson of this chapter is not that Jacob was still selfish, but it's that one should make their vows precise, and to take any vow you make seriously. If you're going to make a promise, you want to word it exactly the way you want it. You want to word it exactly the way you're going to follow it. You want to say exactly what you're really going to do. You don't want to just, like how we all do with the Apple, with the iPod stuff, where we're just like, click, okay, accept. You don't want to do that, because you don't know what you're agreeing to. You need to really be careful and think about what you're agreeing to and what you're saying you believe. Like for those of us who have a creed, whether it's Catholicism or Islam or anyone else who has a creed of some kind, doctors who have a creed, you got to think about what exactly you're saying, because you're saying that you believe in this creed, that this creed is what you believe in, what you will live by, and how you will live your life, and how you will express yourself to other people. And it means that other people can look at you and say, do you really believe in this thing? And you have to say, if you really do believe it, you have to say, yeah, I do believe in this. And some of the things are going to be hard for other people to accept. So you gotta really be sure you know what you're agreeing to when you make a vow. And then take that vow very seriously and live up to whatever you promise. Okay, and then we get to the sacred pillars. So the sacred pillar erection was a pre-Israelic custom and tradition. Pillars represented male power, masculine virility, while trees represented female power, feminine fertility. So if you go back all the way to Genesis, and I even said that I would eventually talk about this, although to be honest, I forgot that I had said that until I saw this note, which is that the trees represent femininity. Okay, so trees represent the female, while stone pillars represent the male, and you can see that very easily. Again, that is pre-Israelic, but the tradition continues on up until 1 Kings, when God tells Jacob to remember I am with you. A lot of people take that as a comforting statement, but I saw something different in there. See, to me, this could be read as a warning that now Jacob must behave and be a better man than he was before the promise. So before the promise, yeah, be a schemer, be a trickster, do whatever. After the promise, no more scheming. Now you got to keep your words. Now if you make a promise, you got to keep that promise. You know what I mean? So it changes. Like now there's pressure on. Now God can see you, so now you got to behave better. Okay? Now God is watching. So be a better person. Live up to a higher standard. It's going to be a while before Jacob gets there, but Jacob will eventually get there. It is interesting that God says that he will not leave Jacob, who now represents the Israeli people, until after the promise has been fulfilled. This implies that God would eventually leave him after the promise was complete. That's an interesting statement. So some Christians could see this as a reference to the coming of the Christ and the destruction of the temple at the hands of the Romans. While some Hebrews could read into this the eventual loss of the Ark of the Covenant at the hands of the Neo-Babylonian Assyrians. So you can see how that prophecy continually fulfills itself and refulfills itself. And it's this cycle. But anyway, those are my notes. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to have to edit this down a lot. Peace, like, subscribe, comment down below, answer those questions, and I'll talk to you all later.